Brief history of firearms in the Philippines. Origin of firearms in the Philippines. Early type of firearms, such as flintlocks, have been used against the Filipinos since the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors in the 1500s. It was the dreaded Kris sword, the main battle sword of the Moro chieftain Lapu-Lapu, that felled Magellan on his way back to Spain. The birth of homemade firearms in the Philippines is accurately documented and can be traced back to the early stages of World War II. American soldier, Ensign Elif D. Robertson, USNR, came up with the idea of an improvised shotgun that could be put together from readily available materials that required no special tooling. Thus was born the slam-bang guerrilla gun. After the war, the guerrilla gun called Paliantad was briefly offered in the US commercial market by a company founded by the inventor himself in 1946, called Richardson Industries. A guerrilla fighter named Simeon A. Cortez contributed much to the development of small arms in the Philippines. During World War II, Cortez invented homemade 81mm mortars for use by the Cebu underground forces that were fighting the Japanese and were under the control of Colonel Harry Fenton and Lieutenant James Cushing, USMC. He also built various bolt-action rifles, pistols and machine guns from scrap salvage gun parts. After the war, Cortez sought an early discharge from the military and reopened a gun shop in his local town of Mandaue in 1945. Danao Guns of the Philippines. Danao City was well known for its gun industry. The industry started around 1905 to 06. When World War II came, the Danao gunsmiths went underground, joined the guerrilla movement or were inducted into the United States Army forces in the Far East. Their main task was to rechamber the Japanese Arisaka rifles to fit the US .30 caliber round or to keep the original Japanese rifle in good service. The industry went on, still underground. In the 1960s, the term Paltic was given to the homemade and illegal guns. In the early 1990s, the industry was legalized by the government, with the creation of two organizations of local gunsmiths. The organization now left with proper permit is Workers' League of Danao Multi-Purpose Cooperative, World MPC, in Dungguan, Danao City. Although homemade guns remain a major concern in the government sector, the problem has grown to a point where control is no longer an issue as drugs and terrorism became a priority over petty gun makers. Ironically, arsenal-made automatic weapons entering the country illegally has now flooded the black market that used to be dominated by Danao products. These military copies are eagerly sought after by terrorist-funded rebel insurgents and Muslim fighters in the south. While Danao's cottage industry's growth has slowed down by the entry of the smuggled foreign-made military weapons in the black market, it is quite likely that Paltic guns will continue to find a market among less hostile clients. From its humble beginning in World War II, the Paltic gun had its own share of glory among guerrilla fighters who effectively used them against the Japanese army when there was a short supply of equipment. There have been several attempts by the Danao city government to legalize the operation of the Workers' League of Danao Multi-Purpose Cooperative, World MPC, that manufactures firearms, but this was never approved by the PNP hierarchy. The Workers' League of Danao Multi-Purpose Cooperative, World MPC, was incorporated on October 1994 with 25 initial members. In November 1996 it was given license to manufacture handguns from caliber 22 to 45 by the Philippine National Police, PNP. The organization had been a potent group in working for the legalization of gun-making industry in the country with the aim to upgrade the technology and skills of gun makers, to provide job security and additional revenue for the government. The gun-making industry in Danao was pioneered using brass or copper as materials. The chairman of World MPC was in charge of the compliance of the requirements of the Firearms Explosive Security Service Agency and Guards Supervisory Section, FESSAGES, until his death in 2010, after which World MPC itself was then shut down for non-compliance of FESSAGES policies. Law on firearms in the Philippines. The first law was Act No. 1780, which is lengthily titled as, An Act to Regulate the Importation, Acquisition, Possession, Use, and Transfer of Firearms and to Prohibit the Possession of Same except in compliance with the provisions of this Act. Strict gun control was enacted in 1972 under the presidency of Ferdinand Marcos. Under Proclamation No. 1081, citizens were banned from carrying a firearm outside of their residences. On May 29, 2013, Benigno Aquino III signed Republic Act 10,591. The Act shall be known Comprehensive Firearms and Ammunition Regulation Act. Section 32. Unlawful manufacture, importation, sale or disposition of firearms or ammunition or parts thereof, machinery, tool or instrument used or intended to be used in the manufacture of firearms, ammunition or parts thereof. The penalty of reclusion temporal to reclusion perpetua shall be imposed upon any person who shall unlawfully engage in the manufacture, importation, sale or disposition of a firearm or ammunition, or a major part of a firearm or ammunition, or machinery, tool or instrument used or intended to be used by the same person in the manufacture of a firearm, ammunition, or a major part thereof. United States gun laws. In the United States, gun laws are found in a number of federal statutes, enforced by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, ATF. The right to keep and bear arms is protected by the Second Amendment to the Constitution since 1791, and most state constitutions also guarantee this right. There is some variance across the country as both federal and state laws apply to firearm possession and ownership. Additionally, the buyer must wait 9 to 12 months and have their fingerprints recorded. Persons are generally prohibited from purchasing a firearm if they have been convicted of a felony, or any other crime for which they could have been sentenced to more than a year in prison, or are under indictment for such. They are a fugitive from justice. They have been convicted of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence. They are an unlawful user of, or addicted to, any illegal controlled substance. They have been adjudicate mentally defective. They have been discharged from the armed forces under dishonorable conditions. They have renounced their United States citizenship. The carrying of weapons, either openly or concealed, is regulated by the states, and these laws have changed rapidly over the past decade. As of 2016, most states grant licenses to carry handguns on a shall-issue basis to qualified applicants. A few states leave the issuance of carry permits to the discretion of issuing authorities, called may issue, while 11 states allow the carrying of firearms in a concealed manner without a permit, called unrestricted carry. 26 states allow for open carrying of handguns without a permit while, in general, 20 states require a permit to do so, and 4 states plus Washington, D.C. ban open carry of handguns. However, under the Law Enforcement Officers Safety Act, current and former law enforcement officers can carry anywhere, except private property where they are subject to the rules of the owner and gun-free public places like schools, as long as they carry a photo ID from their agency and have completed yearly training from said agency. There have been legal challenges to concealed carry laws, with different rulings to their constitutional validity. Pros and cons in possessing firearms. Gun ownership pros. A sense of security. Shooting sports. Some people find pleasure and joy collecting firearms just as other people enjoying collecting cars, books, etc. Gun ownership cons. Firearms are often stolen or misplaced. The risk of self-injury while handling a firearm can be very high if proper precaution is not taken. Firearms are risky to own if you or a loved one is A. Suicidal, B. Homicidal, C. Mentally or emotionally ill. Failure to follow firearms laws and regulation can result to prosecution. If you have a bad judgment, it can make you get into trouble. Trafficking of illegal firearms. Firearms being trafficked around the globe. In Brazil, this is the main activity of frontier smugglers, mostly at the Brazil-Paraguay area, where firearms enter the black market. The Russian mafia, on the other hand, sponsors the importation of illicit arms to Brazil through the ports of Rio de Janeiro and Santos in São Paulo. In Papua New Guinea, firearms enter the community from Australia, Indonesia, and the Solomon Islands in container cargo vessels, light aircraft, fishing trawlers, and by individual couriers or through parcel ports. As an importer, the Philippines gets its guns mainly from the United States, and as a manufacturer, moves imported as well as locally crafted handguns to Taiwan, Japan, Malaysia, and other Asian countries. This is done either by misdeclaring the contents of cargo containers and sending them to a fictitious consignee, or by smuggling the firearms into non-commercial ports. As in India, it is through penetrable borders where firearms find their way into Malaysia. The problem, though not serious, is compounded by the lack of control at the borders, making it ideal for arms smugglers. Because of the proximity of Muslim Mindanao in the Philippines, it is believed that illegal firearms are trafficked between these two countries by sea. The United Nations has been endeavoring to fight and eradicate transnational organized crime and, in fact, has been campaigning for the adoption of the 3 related protocols on firearms, smuggling of migrants, and trafficking in persons for the establishment of an effective legal framework against transnational organized crime.